I'm glad I got the Jamaica cup.
Oh, go do it. You know, it's true, right? That we drink tea always with our interviews.
It's important.
Hello, welcome to Ray Recommends. My name is Raymond Antrobus. I'm here with a poet from San Francisco, a teacher from San Francisco, a human being from Earth, Matthew Siegel. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Ray. It's really good to be here talking to you.
So you wrote a book which was nominated for a Ford Prize called Bloodwork. Fascinating book which explores, I guess, your own relationship with your illness and medication and how that plays into the conversations and relationships you have in your life and the people around you. How did you find a way for, to make a space to talk about illness in your own poetry?
Well, I find that, as a teenager I was very, very ill, and illness really actively destroys narrative. It's by definition, it's anti-narrative, because it strips you from who you are in a lot of ways, and it creates a distance between the idea you have of yourself and the reality of how you have to live. Even before I was sick, I'd write about, my family or relationships or history or, trying to figure out who I am. Because ultimately that's really one of the biggest questions for a poet is, who am I? What is my place here on this earth, right? Because a lot of people walk around their whole lives thinking they don't have a purpose. But poets don't really have that problem in the same way if you're serious about the work. Because on some level, even if the work isn't good, you understand that it matters. And I think that's really the big question, is that how do you get it to matter? Because your life matters. And so I guess for me, it wasn't necessarily a natural thing just to immediately start writing about it, but I had good guidance. I had teachers that were willing to say, you need to keep doing this. And it also felt necessary because there wasn't a space otherwise. There's a really great Cheryl Strayed essay called The Love of My Life. She talks about grief and that typically the cultures we live in don't create a space for grief. They don't create a space for pain being witnessed. And in fact, I think everyone's always afraid of being some kind of emotional imposition. I still feel that way because I know how much I feel and I know how much that I want to say. And not everybody's willing to go there with you. And in a way, there's a great relief in making the private public. I mean, there are a lot of reasons, right? The biggest one is that you can find someone else that says, me too.
Is there a way that you are writing in the hope of reaching people who are also going through the thing and I guess has your book been prescribed, as it were?
Yeah, I have to say, it would make me extremely happy if other people with Crohn's read it. Really, really it would. I feel like I would hope that it's somewhat universal. So my American publisher wanted Crohn's on the back cover, and I agreed to it, some idiot. Because, it's not that I'm afraid of being pigeonholed in any way, but I really, I have no problem sharing that this is what my story is, but to make it just about that, I think is really reductive, because I would hope that someone that's never had or even known anyone that has this can walk into the work and understand or be able to connect, because this body, the idea of having a body is universal. I understand now in 2016 we have a whole new lexicon for, how different bodies are treated in the world, right? Yeah. But there's a big part of me that clings to this sort of Whitman-esque idea that we are bound to each other because we have bodies, and that even if there are all of these differences that we have to figure out a way to appreciate and endure, there must be something that binds us, and that I would hope that some people can find some space there. Because there's this idea also that a poem has to be sort of about one thing or have one feeling, but that's not how we operate as human beings, right? We're complex, right? It's never just one feeling. I forget who said it, but the greatest tragedy is laced with comedy, and vice versa, right? So, I have students sometimes that are writing about, let's say death or sickness, and it's just so. And part of the reason why I think it's so hard for them is because they're not willing to let in anything else. They think if they let in humor that suddenly it's less important, or less impactful. But actually, like, if we're willing to look at the bigger picture in terms of the complexity of one human's emotional life, like, you never just feel one thing. It's never just sadness. It's never just happiness. It's always colored with these other things. So part of the idea, at least for me, is like, how do we help each other to be ourselves completely?
I want to go back to what you say about the body as well, because when your body comes into a space, that's saying something. You know, in the times that we're living in, you know, there's so much discussion around race. We were talking earlier about sexuality and gender politics and stuff like that. So it's you coming from the States, coming to England. There's still a strange kind of idea of what kind of poetry or what kind of language belongs where, or what kind of bodies belong where. Maybe the States doesn't have that as much because there's a language for it, because people are talking more about intersectionality, as well as people would say that we have a different relationship with our literature canons, a different history.
Definitely.
Is there any kind of observations that you've made about the poetry that you've seen here, or the discussions that you've seen here, and how they relate to what's happening in the States with poetry?
Yeah. I think in the issue in the States that's changed was that when I came up through doing some slams, and when I did some slams in college and whatever, and was involved in that, and I went to nationals and I was on the Ithaca team and all that, there was always this unspoken or sometimes spoken suspicion that came from academia, because in a way there were people that found it threatening, right? Because they wanted possession over it to some degree. Which in a way one could say is a natural thing, but ultimately it's not something that helps the culture. It's not something that helps build a community. It basically is a way of wanting to keep power. One could even say white supremacy to some degree, if we're going to go there, you know, because a lot of the critiques of slam in the States were often very much couched in these terms that, you know, if you examine them on a closer level, it's about race and class. And it's because when we're talking about language, you know, why would someone be offended by the kind of language someone else is using unless they feel threatened by that person on some level? So the thing that's shifted also is that a lot of the slam poets have just also gotten hip to reading a lot. I mean, one thing that, you know, it's easy to critique the academic side as being like, whatever. And those criticisms are valid. But I think one thing that's shifted in the spoken word community is that people realize that you can't really do it without reading a lot. You can't be a good poet. You can't just go to slams and expect that you're going to really get a good background on what it means to be a poet. The traditions are too big and too old, right? It's like, because the thing is that with the slam, it's just like being an editor and reading submissions for a magazine. Most of it is not good, you know, unless it's curated, which is different, right? Like a curated performance is very different from an open slam that anyone can sign up, and you're going to get a lot of the same stuff. But, you know, on the other side, again, like at the academic side, you look at these, when people submit to magazines, it's mostly crap also. So like, you know, it's a matter of simply of curation, and you know, at this point in the States, the distinctions are getting a lot blurrier, just because also it's the conversations that we're having now. It's just so abundantly clear that you cannot reject someone's poetics just because of, you know, some sort of hang-ups that you have, you know, which on one end they would say is aesthetic, but I would say it's not. I would say it's probably political. That you can't find a way to listen to these people because they don't use language in the same way that you do. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It's like when people say that they like hate hip hop. I was like, what do you know about hip hop? It's like, really? It's like, do you know anything about this thing that you claim to dislike so much? And so when I hear people really rejecting one entire school of thought, I'm always suspicious, and I'm always wondering what else is at play there. Because ultimately, we need each other to survive. Like, no bullshit, you know, like as writers and as human beings. So if we're going to be writers being like, oh, this is poetry, this is not poetry, this is a poet, this is not a poet, it's like that doesn't do anything for anybody, except maybe make one asshole feel better about themselves. But ultimately that distinction actually really drives me nuts, because it silences a great lot of people, and it creates a system where it creates a really fucked up power dynamic. I don't know if you swear in this thing.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Okay.
Motherfucker! Fuck that shit!
Yeah, fuck that shit. So yeah, that's the thing. And ultimately, it didn't... it didn't affect me personally, right? Like I carry different privileges, so it's not like I was officially silenced on any level, because I was also always straddling the two spaces, right? Like I love my friends who can freestyle, and I find it's fucking magical.
Yeah.
It's magical,
yeah.
you know? And I always felt really bad for the academics who weren't able to find a way into those spaces, even as an observer. Because it's like you're missing a huge part of what it means to be an artist that uses words, right? Like we're dealing with the same material. And our problems are not that different, right? We're talking about like human concerns, right? And so when we're looking at the spoken word community, right, which we can critique, and we could spend time doing that. I'm not as interested in that at the moment, but we could.
Yeah.
You're finding a really sort of direct and confrontational approach that I think is actually quite necessary. That being said, I think that, there's some issues that I can complain about for a while, but I'm more interested in the fact that this is a good thing, that there are people engaged in language at all, right? Period.